Have you ever been judged just for the clothes you were wearing? Maybe not with words, but with a disapproving glance, a subtle indifference, that quiet gesture that says you don't belong. That's exactly what Aaliyah went through. A young black woman in simple clothes walked into a fancy restaurant just to wait for her father, and within minutes the space turned into a stage of silent judgment. No one needed to say a word. The looks, the muffled chuckles, the deliberately slow service said it all. You shouldn't be here. Aaliyah asked for nothing but respect. She sat at the table with the posture of someone who knows their worth, even when others refuse to see it. But in that place, worth seemed to be tied to appearance, and she, wearing simple jeans, a white t-shirt, and her hair in a neat bun, didn't meet the expectations. The waiters ignored her. The manager came over with a forced smile and said, "The restaurant was reserved for customers with a minimum order." A polished way to throw someone out without staining his suit with offensive words, but no one there expected what would happen next. Minutes later, the sound of an armored SUV echoed from outside. The driver jumped out and respectfully opened the back door. Out stepped a man in a dark suit, with a presence that silenced the room. It was Aaliyah's father, one of the most influential businessmen in the country, owner of a conglomerate that, ironically, had investments in the food industry. And that restaurant was part of his group's portfolio. The atmosphere flipped instantly. The manager turned pale. The staff exchanged panicked looks. And Aaliyah? She calmly stood up, hugged her father, and said with a soft smile, "Is this the place you wanted to show me?" Visibly confused, he glanced around and sensed the tension. Then came the question, spoken with calm strength. Why was my daughter treated this way? Because of her clothes, her skin color, or both? The silence that fell on that restaurant was deafening. This story could have ended there, with scandal, mass firings, a public apology. But Aaliyah chose a different path. She didn't want revenge. She wanted transformation. So she and her father made a proposal for the entire staff to undergo inclusive service training. That the restaurant become a model, not a shame. That this pain become a turning point, not just another memory. In the days that followed, the video of the SUV arriving went viral. Thousands shared it, commented, reflected. Some were shocked. Others felt ashamed, realizing they'd acted like those waiters, quick to judge, slow to embrace. And that's the most important part. This story wasn't just Aaliyah's. It was all of ours. Because how many times have we crossed paths with someone and, without realizing it, mapped out their entire life based on their clothes, the way they walk, or the absence of designer brands? How many stories have we ignored simply because they didn't seem worthy of our attention? The transformation didn't stop at the restaurant. It started there and spread. Other businesses reached out to Aaliyah's team to implement the same training. One waiter from that day started posting about empathy in service. A hostess, once indifferent, began speaking out about inclusion and representation in luxury spaces. Everyday people, just like you and me, began sharing stories of when they too had been judged and for the first time felt seen. Aaliyah became a symbol, not of wealth, but of awareness. Because the most powerful thing about this story wasn't the armored car or the influential name. It was how she turned humiliation into a seed of change. What was supposed to be just another lunch became a lesson. And what a lesson. She showed that dignity isn't defined by designer labels, that bank accounts don't earn respect, that status without character is just noise, and that the most powerful stories are often born from the most unfair moments, because that's when truth speaks the loudest. You might not have a SUV waiting outside, but you have a choice. Keep judging like everyone else, or start seeing the world through the lens of transformation. Because every time you judge someone by their cover, you could be missing a story that might change yours. So next time you meet someone who seems out of place, take a breath, look again, listen with your heart. Because what seems invisible today might be the very thing that teaches you the most tomorrow. And if this story touched you in any way, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment. Spark a conversation. Because the change we want to see in the world starts with small choices and multiplies when one story inspires the next. Aaliyah walked into that restaurant with quiet steps, carrying a weight most people pretend not to see. She wore simple clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, and a well-done bun, the kind of look that doesn't scream for attention, but often gets ignored in places where luxury sets the tone. She was just there to wait for her father. But you know that kind of look that doesn't shout, but judges? That's what came from all sides. Those eyes that without a word say, "You don't belong here." As silverware clinked and polite chatter filled the air, the waiters walked past Aaliyah like she was invisible. No menu offered, no, "Can I help you?" Nothing. That's the cruelty of silent judgment. It doesn't push, it isolates, it doesn't insult, it excludes. And this happens every day, in banks, in stores, in those fake smiles of people who measure worth by fabric and not by the soul of the person wearing it. How many stories start like this, with someone being underestimated before they even say their name? Then the manager approached, wearing that rehearsed air of fake politeness. "Perhaps this isn't the place you're looking for," he said, as if offering advice, when in truth he was serving up prejudice wrapped in courtesy. The problem is, when a critique is dressed in manners, it's mistaken for policy. But don't be fooled. Polite prejudice is still prejudice. And that was just the first layer of a story that was about to shake that room full of crystal and vanity disguised as elegance. "Unfortunately, all tables are reserved," the manager said, glancing over her shoulder, as if Aaliyah's presence tainted the place's aesthetic. The irony. Many tables were clearly empty, but availability wasn't the issue. Discomfort was. The discomfort of someone who didn't match the decor. This kind of humiliation rarely comes with yelling. It comes with forced smiles, rehearsed excuses, and polished lines. And that's why so many pretend it's not prejudice, because it was said with class. Would you like a shorter version of this translation for social media or video description? In practice, what they did to Aaliyah is something many people have silently endured. A black customer, dressed casually, being asked to leave a public space under the pretext of house rules. And here's the warning. When internal rules are applied selectively, they stop being rules and become tools of exclusion. Many people who watch these stories from afar think it's exaggerated. But ask someone who's been through it. Ask someone who was ignored in a store, turned away from an office building, or poorly treated at a cafe. The looks around her didn't help. On the contrary, they were like small blades, sharpened by vanity and soaked in judgment. Customers who preferred to believe the exclusion was fair because she didn't look like someone who belongs here. It's frightening how appearance still outweighs human value. And if you think this only happens in fancy restaurants, look around. How many resumes are tossed aside because of a photo? How many stories are silenced before they even begin because someone judged the cover instead of reading the book? But in that restaurant, a new chapter was about to begin. It was only a few minutes of waiting, but enough for Aaliyah to feel the weight of an entire system on her shoulders. Suddenly, the sound of a powerful engine echoed along the sidewalk. A bulletproof SUV, the kind that doesn't ask permission to make an impact, pulled up in front of the restaurant. The door opened, and out stepped Elijah Carter, subtle suit, commanding presence, and a gaze that cut through the room like a hot knife through butter. He didn't smile. He didn't greet. He asked just one question. "Where is my daughter?" The once buzzing dining room fell into a paralyzing silence. The manager, now pale, seemed to search for words in the back of a dry throat. He never imagined that this simply dressed young woman was the daughter of one of the largest education investors in the US and Africa. The same man who had donated millions to schools in neglected regions was now there, demanding respect. And if there's one thing people like him do not tolerate, it's seeing someone they love being treated as invisible. This kind of reversal is rare, but powerful, because it publicly exposes what is usually hidden behind selective politeness. Elijah wasn't there to make a scene. He was there to show, through presence and composure, that someone's value has nothing to do with appearance. And how many similar stories happen every day, but without an SUV, without a billionaire, and without a witness. But in that moment, everything was about to become headline news, and no one there could imagine how far the impact would reach. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't respectful silence. It was the silence of shock, guilt, and shame. Everyone froze. Glasses suspended mid-toast, waiters stuck with plates in hand, customers glancing sideways, trying to mask their discomfort. And there, in the center of it all, was Aaliyah, sitting calmly, as if she knew the world was finally watching. Not because she shouted, but because the truth shouted for her. The manager tried to say something. He stuttered, spoke of rules, tried to patch things up with weak excuses, like trying to cover a hole with a wet cloth. Elijah listened silently until he said firmly, and without raising his voice, "Thank you for showing my daughter that money can't buy character, and that we still have a lot of work to do." And it was as if each word landed like a hammer. That sentence wasn't just a message, it was a mirror held up for everyone in that room. This kind of moment doesn't need editing or a soundtrack. The scene itself was cinematic. And the most striking part? It wasn't the SUV or the man's name. It was the contrast between the judgment that came before and the revelation that came after. These stories are uncomfortable because they shatter assumptions, because they show that sometimes the hardest slap in the face comes in a calm tone, and that real authority doesn't yell, it simply stands firm. And when that happens in front of cameras, a click, a short video, that's all it took. One customer recorded the moment with their phone, and suddenly, the story had left the walls of the restaurant and gone global. Social media did what it does best, or worst, it amplified. Within minutes, the video was circulating in WhatsApp groups, influencer feeds, and major news headlines. But this time, it wasn't just gossip or scandal. It was a raw portrait of a problem too many people pretend doesn't exist. What started as a typical scene of quiet prejudice became the spark for a national conversation about structural racism. People from all walks of life began sharing similar accounts. Waiters who looked the other way, stores that followed black customers through the aisles, interviews that were denied without even reading the resume. These stories, once hidden behind closed doors, were now exposed. And the question that echoed was, how many Aaliyahs are ignored every single day? Newspapers, TV shows, podcasts. Everyone wanted to understand how a simple lunch outing became a social turning point. And the answer was clear. This wasn't the first time, just one of the rare times someone captured it on video. And more importantly, someone with enough influence made the world listen. But Aaliyah herself hadn't spoken yet. And when she finally did, when Aaliyah finally spoke to the press, the impact was instant. There was no outrage, no yelling, just a painful calm that said more than 1,000 fiery speeches. She looked into the camera and said, "I don't want revenge. I want change. How many people are humiliated every day for not looking rich? I was lucky. My father showed up." And that's when it hit many people. Because the truth is, most stories like this don't end with a rescue SUV or a billionaire stepping in. What Aaliyah did went far beyond giving a statement. She pulled the emergency brake on a society used to normalizing the absurd. She didn't ask for anyone to be fired, didn't threaten lawsuits, didn't go for confrontation. She pointed to the root, the one hidden in the details, in tone of voice, in which customer gets a smile, in the line that moves faster for those who look acceptable. And the scariest part? Many people only began to notice it when someone powerful walked in. But what about those who don't have billionaire fathers, who aren't recorded, who are thrown out and simply go home carrying one more invisible wound? That's why Aaliyah's words resonated so deeply. Because they weren't just about her. They were about all the swallowed silences, all the closed doors, all the times respect was tied to status. And when a story reaches that level of collective resonance, the next step isn't just to speak, it's to transform. The restaurant tried to contain the damage. They released an apology, one of those crisis PR statements, carefully worded but soulless. It claimed that the incident does not reflect the company's values and that actions would be taken. But the internet doesn't forgive emptiness. Quickly, social movements, black activist groups, and hospitality professionals demanded something no statement could offer: real action. Because at that point in the story, remorse wasn't enough. Proof was needed. The pressure didn't just come from activists. Renowned chefs, food influencers, and even former customers of the restaurant began to speak out. How can you trust a place that doesn't know how to welcome diversity? How can you dine somewhere where treatment depends on your clothes? This kind of public exposure forces institutions to face themselves in the mirror, and sometimes that reflection isn't pretty, but it's necessary. And when pressure comes from all sides, you either learn or collapse. That's when deeper conversations began. Seminars on inclusion in the service industry, panels on anti-racist training, live streams with stories from people who've experienced similar things. Aaliyah's story became a catalyst, a starting point for something bigger. And ironically, it all began not with a formal complaint, but with a moment that escaped control and exposed what many try to hide. But Aaliyah and her father weren't stopping there. Elijah and Aaliyah knew that impact wasn't enough. They had to build a legacy. So they announced a scholarship program for young black people in the fields of gastronomy, hospitality, and tourism. The proposal was simple but powerful. Offer real opportunity to those who have always had doors closed because of their appearance. The goal wasn't just to train professionals, but to build awareness. After all, how many stories of talent are lost every year due to lack of access? The project gained momentum quickly. Partner restaurants, award-winning chefs, and educational institutions joined the initiative. It became a wave of good that didn't stem from guilt, but from a desire to repair, to turn error into a foundation for a new path. And more than teaching technique, the program included lessons on empathy, humanized service, and fighting prejudice. Because there's no point in training excellent chefs if they replicate the same exclusions they once suffered. And that's the beauty of a well-told story. It inspires action. Elijah and Aaliyah's decision showed that even the most traumatic scene can be redefined. They didn't use power to punish. They used it to plant. And each young person included in the program carried not just a dream, but a mission. Yet sometimes the greatest impact doesn't come from big names. It comes from those who were there, silent, witnessing everything. Months after the incident, one of the waiters who had witnessed everything sought out Aaliyah, not out of obligation or for publicity, but with a sincere apology and tear-filled eyes. He said the episode made him rethink everything, how he treated customers, the silences he allowed, even his own understanding of empathy. He quit his job and decided he wanted to work with purpose. He wanted to help change the stories he used to watch passively, without taking action. Instead of judging him, Aaliyah extended her hand. She invited him to join the program she had created with her father, not as a student, but as a mentor. He would now give talks on human-centered service, on how small gestures shape experiences, on how every customer carries a story that deserves respect. He became living proof that you don't need to be a victim to learn. You just have to be willing to listen, to reflect, and most importantly, to change. Redemption doesn't erase the mistake. It turns it into a seed. That gesture touched many people. It showed that yes, it's possible to fail and rebuild, that genuine remorse has the power to transform, and that sometimes the greatest testimony doesn't come from the victim, but from the one who had the courage to admit their fault and do things differently. That waiter's story became part of a larger narrative, a reminder that awareness is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised. And that social muscle would only grow stronger as Aaliyah's journey reached the world. Aaliyah's story didn't end that afternoon, nor with an apology. It was told and retold in documentaries, lectures, academic articles, and classrooms. It was heard at education congresses, used as a case study in tourism schools, and became a reference in service industry training programs. What once was a moment of humiliation became a turning point, one of those moments that teaches more than any formal course ever could. And here's the curious part. Aaliyah never sought visibility. She just wanted to have lunch. But the truth is, great changes don't ask for permission. They impose themselves. And when a story carries so much truth, so much pain, and so much dignity, it breaks through the boundaries of personal experience and becomes a collective movement. People around the world began rethinking behavior, reviewing policies, retraining staff, all because of a young woman who didn't raise her voice, but lifted the world around her. Today, when people talk about respect, inclusion, and humanized service, her name comes up, not as a symbol of suffering, but as a symbol of transformation. Her path became a mirror, and in many places, a compass. Because the greatest legacy of a story like this isn't fame or publicity, it's the real change it inspires. And if even a simple meal sparked this kind of impact, just imagine what's still to come. Now tell me honestly, how many times have you ignored an Aaliyah without even realizing it? How many times have you crossed your arms or looked away from someone who, based on their appearance or way of speaking, didn't seem to deserve your attention? Maybe it wasn't out of malice. Maybe it was automatic. But that's exactly where the problem lies, in automated indifference. In the way prejudice hides in small gestures, in split-second reactions, in the words we don't say, but still think. The truth is harsh but necessary. We've all been complicit in judgment in one way or another. And these stories, like Aaliyah's, who walked into a luxury restaurant to wait for her father and was treated like she didn't belong, are an uncomfortable mirror, a reminder that prejudice doesn't just live in hateful speeches. It thrives in silence, in the doors that don't open, in the glances that look past, in the smiles that never come. Aaliyah didn't ask for special treatment. She just wanted respect. But in that place full of artificial shine, the waiters ignored her, and the manager approached with a forced smile and veiled words, the kind that disguise contempt with politeness, all because she was a young black woman in simple clothes. Because the world still measures character with brand name and dignity with bank balance, what should have been a quiet moment of waiting became a minefield of silent prejudice. But life has a strange way of flipping the script when you least expect it. Minutes after the humiliation, a black armored SUV pulled up in front of the restaurant. Out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit and firm posture, Aaliyah's father, one of the most successful businessmen in the country, a billionaire, influential, respected in the highest circles. The same man who, days before, had declined an award, saying success shouldn't be measured by ego, but by the impact it leaves on others. What followed wasn't a scandal. It was a masterclass. Justice delivered with grace. Aaliyah's father didn't shout, didn't demand revenge. He simply looked the manager in the eyes and said, "You've just taught my daughter a lesson I wish she didn't have to learn so early. The world still judges more than it sees, but she also learned that when you know your worth, you never have to prove it externally." That moment went viral, not because of wealth, but because of the lesson. Suddenly, this story was everywhere. In the news, in group chats, on podcasts, in dinner conversations. It spread not through shock, but through the truth it carried. Because everyone has either been Aaliyah or treated someone like her. What seemed like just another incident of discrimination became a symbol of something bigger, a call to recognize, reflect, and act. And here's where you come in. Because this story, more than a powerful narrative, is a wake-up call, a call to awareness. How many Aaliyahs do you still ignore on your street, at your job, on the bus, in the grocery store line? How many opportunities have you missed to hear a powerful story just because you judged the book by its cover? Maybe today is the day to change that. You might think it's an exaggeration, that these are isolated cases, but they're not. They're repeated. They're daily. They just don't make the headlines because not every Aaliyah has a billionaire father. Most go unnoticed. They suffer in silence, swallow their tears, convince themselves they deserve less, and so the world keeps spinning, increasingly indifferent. But if you've read this far, maybe you don't want to be part of that cycle anymore. Maybe you're ready to be part of the change. And if this story stirred something in you, good. That was the point. Not to offend, but to wake you up. Because the world doesn't change with likes, hearts, or reactions. It changes with action. With small decisions that, added together, create a quiet revolution. It changes when you choose to see deeper, to listen with empathy, to act with respect, even when no one is watching. So what are you going to do now? Scroll past and forget? Pretend none of this hit close to home? Or start writing new stories with your own hands? Because it's easy to be moved by the SUV's arrival. What's hard is to truly change when the camera isn't rolling. But that's exactly when character is tested. Start small. Look around. Treat people kindly. Give a compliment for no reason. Say good morning with meaning. Correct a friend when they make a prejudice joke. Stand up for someone being discriminated against, even if it earns you strange looks. It's not about saving the world all at once. It's about preventing it from collapsing further due to a lack of humanity. And if you believe the world needs more truths like this, then stay. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and walk this path with us. Because here, every video is more than content. It's an invitation to transform reality. Each episode is a chance to reflect, to challenge norms, to be productively uncomfortable. We don't want followers here. We want the awake. People who feel. People who act. Aaliyah's story isn't just about racism or status. It's about human worth, about the power of presence, about the impact of speaking up even when silence would be easier. And if today you felt touched, moved, or even unsettled, congratulations. That's already a beginning. Because no one truly changes the world without letting it touch them first. So now, with honesty, what will you do with this discomfort? Will you go on like nothing happened? Or will you let this story change you on the inside, the way it changed Aaliyah on the outside? The world needs more people like you. Not just willing to listen, but willing to act.